Good day and welcome to this special broadcast of Energy in Africa. I'm your host, Renuka Methil. This series will look at the energy industry in Africa and what it will take to make the leap to cleaner energy. In today's episode, we dwell on leadership, governance, and ethics as Africa joins the world's transition to cleaner energy from reliance on fossil fuels. What kind of new leadership is required to drive the required technological advancements, and what role can our institutions of higher learning and the research community play in ensuring the continent is an equal participant in the transition? Joining me today to answer this very pertinent question and more over the next 30 minutes are Professor Lwazi Ngubevana, the Director of the African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School in Johannesburg, and Verner Ayukegba, who's a Senior Vice President of the Africa Energy Chamber. A warm welcome to our guests today. Really nice to have you here both, and since we're also just a few days away before the COP26 climate conference happening in Glasgow, so I think this is a very, very pertinent conversation to have at this point. But since last year, if you look at it, we've had the 3 C's dominating headlines. You've had the coronavirus, the cryptocurrencies, and climate change. Climate change is the existential threat of our time, unfortunately, and as Africa continues to navigate its energy transition, of course, the first bastion of change are the universities and the energy leaders of tomorrow. Let me start with the Wits Business School and you, Professor Lwazi. My question to you is, the energy of Africa's youth and Africa's natural resources, they're both untapped. How can we bring the two together? How can the youth use their skills to mobilize big investors with deep pockets towards nature-based management and decarbonizing economies? I think that is the most relevant aspect of today's discussion, the youth. How can they bring about that necessary change?
Thanks, Renuka. Look, I think this is a multidimensional problem. I don't think that we can approach it from one angle. Firstly, Africa is a very young continent with a median age of 18 or 19, and therefore, we need to make sure that we groom the youth of the continent to take charge of their own futures, really. Now, what can the youth do to get business to invest? I think we need advocacy. We need to, like I said, in the process of grooming young people of the continent to take over, to ensure we instill in them, the importance of their own futures, and therefore we need them to then become advocates for change. We need them to drive the agenda. We've seen some interesting things in other parts of the world, for example, where young people have gotten more active in climate litigation. And that's something we're not seeing in Africa. And this is just one of the things that I think young people can start doing to influence the private sector in particular, and governments for that matter, to start moving towards a cleaner future.
Maybe, Professor, the trickling down is not actually happening. I mean, it takes a lot of political vision and political will for climate change to be expedited in a more speedy manner than it is. And the youth are not capacitated enough. And that's where the universities will definitely play a role, because you need to build that sort of research capacity. You need to build that awareness. You need to equip them. You need to upskill them. Even climate science is something that's so important. We always hear about climate debt that is owed by the global north to us. Where do you think that funding is going to come from? How will it reach the continent? And will it actually reach even some of the universities in funding some of these ideas and innovations and projects moving forward?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. Interestingly, I read an article, I think this morning, from India, where there's suggestion that, or at least a call for the developed world to pay for essentially the damage they've done to the planet. And I agree with that call, that the developed economies need to make sure that they pay their dues to the African continent. Africa is unfortunately going to suffer the worst consequences of climate change. It's already suffering. And Africa is the smallest contributor to the problem. Now, how do we get the funding into the continent. I think we need to start making it part of our trade agreements that, Africa is endowed with natural resources and the rest of the world needs them. And we need to start ensuring that we put a premium on our natural resources, and premium that we will then funnel towards funding, climate education, and not just at university level, but all the way through from, primary schooling, all the way to the research and development. So I think that is just but one of the ways we can make sure that we fund these institutions.
I mean, it's such an irony that, we're one of the richest and most biodiverse continents on the planet in terms of biodiversity. We're one of the richest. We have great forests, and then still we're going to suffer for what the rich countries have done, and we're going to have to pay up for this damage that's been happening. And we need to surely speeden up. There's an urgency to speeden up climate change. There's an urgency to come to net zero. But that's clearly not happening in the near future. But we'll definitely come back to that. I really do want to talk to you about what is a new kind of ethical leadership that we need at this point. But let me come to you, Verner. You've got a new African Energy Chamber Outlook report releasing. Can you just take us through some of the findings? What are the insights on the future of Africa's energy markets? Is it still gloom and doom that you see there?
That Outlook report is going to give an in-depth understanding of what we're likely to see in 2022. If I take, for example, the oil and gas sector, we can see that we are seeing many industries now, many companies now looking to invest more, which was not necessarily the case in the past. And that's pretty much because there has been a slight increase in the revenues around the last quarter of this year, which we're going to see in the last quarter of this year due to energy prices. So the amount of money which is there to be able to invest in capital projects is likely to increase. So 2022, 2023, we're likely to see an uptick in activity, particularly also buoyed with respect to the prices, but also with the fact that we're seeing overall decreases in COVID cases, even though we are seeing, of course, a resurgence in some other countries like the United Kingdom, but overall across the board, as the vaccines take hold, as economies open, we are likely to see increased investment in that sense. But then let me talk about the energy situation in Africa with respect to what we see. We continue to see a growing demand for energy, for power, which is somewhat unsatiable because the ability of governments, companies to be able to take care of this demand is not there. Because of COVID, we saw a 2.5% decrease overall in generation. So that is a problem because there is an increasing demand. We're seeing increasing urbanization. So in 2022, unfortunately, the story is that Africa continues to need power, which it somewhat cannot generate. And so we have to find ways as the chamber, as the continent, to be able to make sure that we can have the lights on, be it in Mpumalanga, be it somewhere in Kenya. But again, that is something, and that is a challenge which, of course, our youth would have to be made aware of so that they can join this fight to be able to make energy poverty history by 2030.
Thank you, Verner. Energy poverty, that definitely is a topic on its own. I mean, why mention Kenya and the other parts of Africa? I mean, here in Santon, Africa's richest square mile, I had almost a whole day of electricity shut down yesterday, and this was during the peak hours. So I think we need to definitely talk about the fact that half of Africa lacks access to electricity. Forget power shutdowns, but they even lack access to electricity. And you're right, I mean, the pandemic has definitely taken away some of the power generation. But how do we expand on that urgently? We need to. We can't be talking about AI and, the fourth industrial revolution and data and all of that without the most basic need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What are the challenges that we're facing now? What are the big barriers?
Manik, I'm so grateful that you bring this point, because I think at this stage, what we need is honesty. We need honesty in the debate. We need honesty in the climate change debate. We need a whole lot of honesty in the power debate. Africa needs power. Africa lacks power. What are other continents doing which gives them that power? It's clear, it's there, we have it in the statistics. We've been looking at it. I'm happy we're not the ones solely who came with our own statistics, but this is, across the board. Other continents have an energy mix that involves a whole bunch of different sources of energy. Germany is at the moment investing in a massive gas pipeline, which is going to bring trillions of cubic feet of gas into Germany out of Russia. Why are Africans not looking to capitalize on gas resources offshore Mozambique, offshore South Africa? We need to do this. We need to absolutely be able to do this. And the professor was talking about youth being involved and engaged in advocacy around climate change and the challenges that we face in engaging the youth. I do believe that the youth in Africa want to be engaged, but they need these issues to speak to their daily lives and to their realities. It is going to be extremely difficult for us to be able to require from them that they be engaged if at all it is as if they're driving an agenda which is not theirs. I would like to argue that our agenda at the moment is energy poverty. You were talking about being in Santon and lacking energy. What about those who are in the hinterlands, who are in hospitals, who are in schools? I bet you that they would not mind to have energy which is coming out of a gas power plant rather than having to wait for another 20, 30 years for a check out of Europe to be able to make sure that they get power out of solar. We are pro climate change. We want the world to move towards a greener sources of energy. But the reality at the moment is that if at all that is impossible at the moment, we need to be able to make use of the resources that God has put in our countries to be able to power our economies, our communities. It is very important because you lose people whenever you try and advocate for something that seems so foreign to them. And that is what we are facing at the moment when we talk about energy issues in Africa. It is so foreign. Climate change seems extremely foreign. It is real, might be to people who are in New York and who are in London in that sense, but we need to bring it home. We need to make sure that we can get our youth engaged. And the only way we can do that is to be honest about initially our own difficulties that we face, and that is access to reliable and affordable energy first. When we get there, and as we are going there, yes, we can advocate for cleaner sources of energy, but it is extremely important to say Africa has different problems than what others have. I think that's what I'd like to say at this point.
Thank you, Verner. Professor, I'd like you to pick up from what he said. Obviously, this is, I mean, when you have cleaner energy, at the end of the day, you're also improving livelihoods. People have access to electricity in hospitals. There are, they have solar power in their homes. There's more cleaner, greener sources that we should be looking at. There should be education around that as well. You've talked a lot about green hydrogen. Is that something that you can introduce us to? What it seems to be the hottest opportunity right now. What are your thoughts about it?
Right, thanks. First, I think, let me agree with Verner in terms of us needing to be honest in the conversation about what our needs are and also about the climate change conversation as a whole. And we do need to be pragmatic in how we approach the transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energies. Fact of the matter is, you've got the Middle East, you've got even countries like Norway. He's mentioned Germany. They've got a mix, and some of these countries have built up reserves to be able to finance their transition to cleaner fuels. However, on the other side of the coin, I think in the South African context in particular, is that you go to areas like Mpumalanga, where we are, mining coal, have been mining coal for the longest time, and you count the real cost of mining coal on the people's lives, on their health. You start to think, is the debate that we're having really even worth having at this point. Yes, there is there's been benefits to us having access to those fossil fuels, but the cost of having that access has been really immense. And so I think we need to be honest in that conversation. Now, coming to green hydrogen, I think green hydrogen is a hot topic, as you've mentioned. I think it presents lots of opportunities, and not only just in the energy space. I think it presents opportunities, for example, in the water space, because we do. I mean, South Africa, for example, is a water scarce country, and where we're going to get water from, we'll probably have to go and develop much bigger seawater desalination capacity, which is something we do not have. So that springs up, a whole range of other industries that we haven't looked at. Of course, technology, it's going to contribute immensely, in terms of technology development. And I think a lot of that intellectual property we can develop, and quite a bit of it we already have in the country, and we need to exploit that. I do think that hydrogen is a fuel of the future, and so we need to make sure that we invest in it. But again, it comes to where do we get the funding to do this, and that's where conversation is, really, really difficult. I do think personally that there are, let's call them what's the word I'm looking for? Other sources of funding that we haven't really explored.
The new ways of financing,
climate
change.
Ways of financing. I mean, I think we can, for example, start looking at communities financing projects and owning renewable energy projects, including investing in green hydrogen. A simple example: South Africa, the Stockville market is what, 25 billion rand annually, and that's a big market, and I think you start getting start accessing those kind of funds, start getting your cooperatives investing in projects that they will actually own, and I think for me that actually drives what you call a just energy transition, where the people are not only beneficiaries but they're actual investors and owners of the transition.
That's a very interesting thought, Professor. That really is. But I think, fortunately, in 2020 and 2021, we've seen an increased acceleration of companies and incorporating responsible investing and ESG into their corporate practices, and also a lot of investors giving a lot of importance to ESG in everything they do. But again, from what I've gathered from this discussion is that we've seriously lagged behind in decarbonizing our economies in Africa. And it seems to me that we literally have to start from scratch. So I have to say that we have to go back to the drawing board. And this is where the universities, again, I have to bring in the universities. So what is the new kind of ethical leadership that is required to bring about this change, Professor?
I think what has been lacking, and I'm glad ESG reporting is becoming more prevalent, has been, that focus on the environment, the focus on society. Business has primarily driven the profit motive, and that's fair. Business exists to make profit, but I think we need to start defining what value is to the shareholders, and I think if shareholders start demanding differently, then I think we start seeing a different type of leader that's not only focusing on the monetary element of your bottom line, and investors start seeing profits slightly differently, because investing in the environment, I think, is investing in our future.
Right. Verner, I'd like to come to you. Now we have the Glasgow Climate Conference happening in a few days. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you think will happen there. And also, how do we model an energy strategy that fulfills the dual priorities of economic growth and environmental sustainability? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, with respect to COP, as it is with respect to many other international agreements of this sort, countries, regions go there with their own interests at hand. Today the Americans are in, tomorrow they're no more in. Today the Chinese are in, tomorrow they're no more in. Today the Indians agree to sign, tomorrow they're denied to sign. The Europeans make amendments or they agree, but they don't quite follow it. I think fundamentally Africans need to ask themselves what is in it for them. What is it that their peoples have mandated them to do in that sense? And I think I need to first of all say and reiterate, climate change is an issue. Climate change is an issue that needs to be addressed. Climate change is an issue that needs to be addressed on a global scale. However, because Sandton, South Africa, Johannesburg is not New York, we need to be able to take that into consideration as we go to the table. First of all, we need to be on the table as Africans. And then we need to be able to clearly say, yes, climate change is an issue, but you know what? 2%, just 2% of emissions are African born, with 16% of the population. We therefore cannot ask or expect that transition in Mpumalanga or in Limpopo is the same as transition in New York. I agree with the professor that we need to look and count the cost of what it is that is happening in our communities with respect to climate change and address those. However, we would lose everybody in Africa and we would lose our youth if at all we do not take in on board the considerations of what it is that affects them on a daily basis. And quite often that is education, that is healthcare, that is jobs and jobs and jobs and jobs again. And you can only get these if at all you have access to reliable and affordable energy. So yes, let's look at retooling 70% of South Africa's power generation, 90%, which comes from coal. Let's look at retooling that. Let's get gas in, which is cleaner. Let's try and look at getting other options. Let's look at hydrogen, which the professor was talking about. But then where are we going to get the money to finance this? We need to look internally to be able to find ways of generating this. If you want to look externally, ask yourself, where is the money which was promised at Kyoto? Where are the finance facilities that came out of Paris? Copenhagen, where are they? They're not there and they're not coming. And I don't want us to bet on that. And so as a result, we need to be able to say to Africans, to our kids, to the youth, if at all it is that you want energy security, you need to be able to invest in that to be able to get what it is that you need. And I think that is where we need to start in terms of the discussions that we're going to have in COP. It is important to send the signals that we are not against climate change or we don't deny climate change. However, we are asking that Africa gets considered differently. We need a climate change deal for Africa. And the deal doesn't have to involve giving Africa any money. The deal just has to involve accepting the realities of the circumstances around in which Africa is and allowing for investments in cleaner fuels like gas to be able to go ahead. But if at all you're going to cancel financing across the board for that, what it means is that you're asking Africans to go back with the begging bowl. We don't want that. If it's good for you, then it's probably also good for us. If it's good for Germans, then it's also good for South Africans. It's good for Kenyans, and it's good for Ghanaians, and it's good for Nigerians.
Yes, Verner, why should we be the ones going with a begging bowl asking for funds? I really, really hope that narrative changes in the years to come. This is definitely a very vast topic, and we have very little time, unfortunately. I'm going to request the professor to sign off and tell us what his thoughts are. We have just a couple of minutes, if you can, Professor.
Thanks. Look, I think just in closing off, first is to agree with Verner that we need to look at our own solutions and we need to make sure that we get our own deal that advances our interests as a continent. But also just to touch on the issue of ethics and governance, in the energy sector on the continent. I do think that we need to drive the conversation differently, as I mentioned, that we need to look at value, what investor value is in a slightly different manner. And this is what we as the ALC are trying to impart, in our leadership, or at least in training our students, to say, we can look at value slightly differently.
Governance, regulations, policy, everything needs to change. It's surely a vast topic, but that is where we will have to leave this discussion for now. I want to thank my guests, Professor Lwazi Ngubevana, the Director of the African Energy Leadership Center at Wits, and Verner Ayukegba, the Senior VP of Africa Energy Chamber, for taking part in today's discussion. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.